Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the 10th of November 2025. We're going to go through the hits and losses and the goings on the front lines of the war in Ukraine over the last 24 hours. But before we get there, please remember to like, subscribe and share. That's super appreciated. If you click the bell icon, then make sure you select all rather than personalized. And that will be fantastic. Right, let's get on with the finer details of what's been going on. Okay, so we have the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them linked in the description below. 1,090 personnel lost, which is over 1,000. Again, good news there for the Ukrainians. 7 tanks and 7 armored combat vehicles. That's fairly good, comparatively speaking. Quite often we have 0 in those categories. So although that's below the daily averages, that's fairly good. At the moment, 9 artillery systems is lower, possibly due to weather and drones failing to operate as far back and as effectively as the Ukrainians would like, or it could signify something else. 77 vehicles and fuel tanks is below 100, so not as high as we have seen. So those are the figures for you for today. We're now going to go to an anecdote, but I think it's fairly reflective of what's been going on. Anton Gerashenko reports of and has subtitled the video of a captured Iraqi soldier, well, Russian soldier who's come from Iraq. Quote, Russians are disgusting. They treat people cruelly and beat them up. They're very bad, treat foreigners badly like slaves. End quote. Ukrainian soldiers at 125th Heavy Mechanized Brigade captured an Iraqi citizen in the Kupiansk area, a 30-year-old Alaa Mohammed Tajil, Al-Jaber village in the Jikwa Governorate. According to him, he came to Russia on a tourist visa, but he and his friends were detained and forced to sign a contract. Otherwise, they would have been imprisoned or killed. They were promised that they would not fight, but they were deceived. As soon as he arrived in Kupiansk, he immediately fled and surrendered to Ukrainian soldiers. Also, Alaa shared that Russians treat foreigners disgustingly. They are often subjected to abuse and beatings. Like I've said 100 times recently, Ukraine is up against it because the Russians, there's an asymmetry there where the Russians are able to mobilize and get their hands on really many more foreign soldiers, and they do this usually through nefarious means, and they treat them very badly. But these are boots on the ground that they can send into the front lines, into the meat grinder, and they don't really have to worry about paying out the families of these soldiers. There's no PR loss in terms of unhappy Russian civilians. You've got unhappy people from Iraq that don't know where their husband, father, son is or whatever. They end up dying. There's no recourse to there's no action that can be brought against Russia for this, or at least not easily. And Russia get away with signing up or press ganging all of these people, and they get that numerical advantage over the Ukrainians. It is definitely a continuing challenge for the Ukrainians. Right, fascinating bit of footage coming out here. So this is a where was this? Is this in Pokrovsk? I think yes. Dnipropetrovsk says that Ukrainian who was on camera in Pokrovsk surrendering the other day was saved by the 2 Russians capturing him getting smacked in the face by an FPV drone. Wow. So friendly drone in the clutch to save the guy from his encounter with Russian soldiers. Like, listen to my kids. Clutching up, guys. So this is a piece of video to suggest that a Ukrainian was saved in a nick of time by this Ukrainian drone that approaches what was apparently a Ukrainian being surrendering to some Russian soldiers, and then the drone hits the Russian soldiers, and the Ukrainian soldier manages then to escape. Is the claim here? So wow, saved by a drone operator. Now, on the personnel side of things, General Sursky, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, says of the defense of Pokrovsk, the Russians only managed to get through engineering barriers in a few places, and the situation is under control. Quote, of course, there is a plan B and a plan C for all scenarios, as you would expect. It is, I mean, someone here says Pokrovsk is not going to fall. It's more and more obvious it's not going to be a second Bakhmut. Actually, it may end up being one of the biggest Russian fiascos, which will help to end the war. It might be for the Russians the same thing Stalingrad was for the Germans. Trust the AFU and Sursky. So that's a very positive outlook. I don't know what I think about Pokrovsk at the moment. You have to fight there, at least on the outskirts in the trenches. But you know, I would advocate for fighting at Pokrovsk. The challenge is this pocket here, the Myrnograd pocket, just to the right of Pokrovsk, which is looking more and more precarious as the days go on. Now, the claim here from Null Reports and from the Ukrainians is that Ukrainian forces have completed a rotation and evacuated wounded troops from the Myrnograd area, according to General Staff spokesman Andriy Kovalov. This happened, I think, a couple of days ago. Fresh supplies and ammunition were delivered, and similar logistics are underway in Pokrovsk, where intense fighting continues. So it looks like they are maintaining a presence there. They're not doing an operational withdrawal, which is what many have suggested, argued for. So yeah, interesting. We'll see what is properly going on, I'm sure, as the days pass and more data emerges. I mean, the simple question is, are the Ukrainians pulling out of this pocket, or are they maintaining presence there? Which is very makes them very vulnerable, because of course the neck of the cauldron can be relatively easily closed given enough Russian soldiers. Okay, Sersky also says the attack on the Ukrainian armed forces in Dnipropetrovsk region, the Russians learned of the troops. So this is the village that was hit with a ballistic missile recently during an award ceremony. And the claim is that the Russians learned of the troops' assembly location through a hacked social media group chat. According to Sursky, the commander who assembled the troops has been placed under suspicion and is already in custody, as I reported previously. Thank you, Ivan, for a beautiful cup of tea in my NAFO mug as well. It's amazing. Cheers, everybody. So, yeah, this is a fascinating bit of extra information that's come out, that actually the Russians were able to find out about the award ceremony, which shouldn't have taken place. You shouldn't be having award ceremonies out in the open in the middle of a village. It endangers civilians and it endangers those soldiers. But it did happen, and it could well have been as a result of a hacked social media group chat or something along those lines. We don't know for sure the amount of dead at the moment. I think there was still some missing. There was something like 8 who had died. I think that included 4 civilians that we heard about. But yeah, it may well be more than that now. Defense forces stopped the advance of Russian troops in the eastern Zaporizhzhia region, according to the commander of the assault troops there. The assault units were able to clear Solodka and Rivna-Pilia. Fighting is underway in Poltavka and Uspanivka. The enemy from these 2 settlements tried to move forwards towards Heliopole. There are all sorts of claims concerning the area in question here, and the claims from the Russians that they have taken Uspanivka and other settlements. So I was talking in my frontline update that I'm really worried about that area south of Pokrovsk, where the Russians seem to be able to march on with very little resistance from the Ukrainians, and that is putting some of these settlements like Heliopole on the southern front line under pressure, not from the south, but actually from as you're looking at me, from the east. So as they're coming in this way, places that have been protected from the south. So, you know, well, really, the southern front line hasn't moved that much at all in the last however long. But actually, that southern Donetsk front line is seemingly capitulating. So something needs to happen there to stop the Russians continually advancing. Claims from the Ukrainians are that, hey, they are doing that. Claims from the Russians are that they are consistently taking villages there. Now, Russia claims it's not mobilization, just, quote, routine work with reservists, but recruitment has begun in 20 regions to guard, quote, critical facilities following a new law that was signed in by Putin on November the 4th. So we have these areas that are signing up more reservists or calling up more reservists. Why is that? Well, Anton Gerashenko says in more detail, it looks like hidden drafting has started in Russia. A campaign started in 20 Russian regions on drafting reservists into units that will secure critically important Russian objects in Tatarstan. This process started back in October. Reservists were recruited to secure all objects. In Nizhny Novgorod, reservists had already been selected and are undergoing training. On November the 4th, Putin signed a decree allowing reservists to be drafted into securing critically important objects in peacetime. So this is changing the rules somewhat. The number of reservists that will be drafted, a main question is whether this is done to accumulate additional human resource for war or to replenish losses and decrease in signing military contracts, which have been the primary source of Russia's cannon fodder in previous years. This should become clear in several months. Several Russian regions have sharply decreased the amount of payments Russians received when they sign a contract with the Russian army. That's probably why the hidden mobilization was launched now. Although it is declared that the reservists will only serve in their regions, there is very little doubt that they will all arrive at the front lines eventually. This should also influence the overall situation with labor resources in Russia. Reservists are usually more educated and qualified. Russia is already experiencing labor shortage, and this will deepen the issue in the long term. Tea break, Yorkshire tea, very appreciated. So yeah, this is a sign of how desperate Russia is for troops on the ground, but it's also, a problem for Ukraine in that these people are thrown into kind of the overall machine. So I guess it's you know even if they don't end up getting sent straight to the front line, it allows other people to do this, and then they can get sent to front. It's all part of the maybe two sides of a square where you get to the same point, um, or these people do end up being able to be sent to the front line eventually. George Barros from the Institute for the Study of War comments on this. As forecasted, Russia is doing compulsory mobilization of reservists, purportedly to protect critical infrastructure in the rear. This reads as a thin excuse to set conditions to eventually start deploying reservists to the front in Ukraine to bolster Russian force generation. Real alarm bell there for the Ukrainians, but alarm bell for the Russian population as well. Now, George Barros also talking about drone warfare. We'll come back to what he says in a second. Let's just go through Tatarigami's thread on drone usage and strategies and whatnot. A few broad observations on the course of the war based on observations, discussions with officers, soldiers, and analysts, data, and other relevant sources. I'll begin with a high-level socio-political overview, but gradually moving toward operational tactical level. Overall, the situation for Ukraine has not improved since last year. Ukraine has markedly increased its long-range strike capabilities, which have very tangible effects across Russian society. However, the battlefield initiative remains with Russia, much as it did in most of 2024. A plausible Ukrainian victory approach can be summarized as disrupt logistics, degrade the Russian economy, and avoid catastrophic operational collapse. Russia's apparent approach is simpler. Keep pressing until Ukraine exhausts its will or physical capacity to resist. The principal problem for Ukraine is an uncertainty about what level of domestic pressure inside Russia would change Putin's course. Many in Russia fear that the regime collapse would lead to a civil war, which makes domestic upheaval unattractive for many, including elites. From Russia's perspective, a long attritional campaign may seem rational. Press continuously and wait for Ukrainian manpower and material limitations to produce a collapse. That logic is coherent, but it has its problems and uncertainties, just like the Ukrainian approach. The tempo of Russian losses and the growing systemic problems within its armed forces mean that even in the best case scenario in Moscow, there is no obvious pathway to a rapid advance to Kyiv. Russia faces a classic sunk cost dilemma, with the costs of war outweighing gains. On the battlefield itself, Russia currently holds an advantage in drone employment on operational level. So this is the nugget that I wanted to share with you, but the whole thread is very, very interesting indeed. So on the battlefield, Russia currently holds an advantage in drone employment on the operational level. Remember, tactical is kind of like we're fighting for that hill over there. If we go to the left of that hill and move up that tree line, then we can take that hill. That's your tactics on kind of a much smaller level. Operational is like what's going on in the whole Pokrovsk sector, not this hill. This hill helps towards that tactical win will help towards the operational win, which is Pokrovsk. for example, or the Kupiansk or the Sumy operational theatre. And then you got the strategic level, which is the entire war, what goes on with regard to decision making in Kiev or Moscow and the strategies of the war, so on and so forth, which the operational builds into. So it's like tactical builds into operational, builds into strategic. So on the operational level, that mid-level, the Russians, according to Tatarigami, have a drone advantage where they are having an effect operationally. Their drone units are effectively used to cut off logistics, prevent rotation, and create localized conditions favorable to advances by ground formations. Russia's drones now influence the battlefield at an operational level, while Ukraine's more efficient systems remain largely tactical. A Ukrainian team may destroy Russian troops, but Russia's broader drone network focuses on severing logistics of the entire force grouping. Russia is seeing a sharp rise in AWOL and desertion cases compared with previous years. However, its efficiency in tracking, returning, and punishing deserters helps contain the overall impact. Ukrainian society is different, and harsh punitive measures would likely provoke serious internal resistance. Instead, efforts focus on improving conditions to reduce AWOL and desertion. So this is carrot versus a stick. Ukrainians can't be too carrot with their troops because you would get a mass uproar because you've got a functioning democracy still, although elections have been put on the back burner for the time being. But you get my meaning. It's like the society is freer than it is in Russia. Russia can afford to use a stick to keep its troops in line, and you see that with the foreign troops. The guy from Iraq there talking about how they're beaten, they're treated terribly to keep them in line. Well, this is evident in the way that they deal with AWOL, people going absent without leave and deserting. The Ukrainians have to make sure that the conditions are good enough so that the Ukrainian troops aren't motivated to desert in the first place, let alone dealing with that afterwards. In my view, however, the situation has passed the point where enforcement can be avoided. Ukraine has resumed forming so-called ghost brigades, which are often undermanned, under-equipped, and plagued by AWOLs, existing mostly on paper while consuming resources. At the same time, there are positive examples of unmanned forces expanding rapidly and effectively. This is what I talked about yesterday, and with the Robert Brovdy video on the recruitment for 15,000 unmanned systems forces personnel, half from the civilian sector. They are able to expand rapidly because you're not fighting in a trench, getting trench foot and likely dying, right? You are more likely to operate behind the front lines and do all sorts of funky stuff that doesn't involve, running directly at the enemy and shooting at each other in Pokrovsk from building to building. So there are successes for the Ukrainians as well as continued challenges. Ukraine's plan to inflict damage on Russia, showcased by an effective long-range drone campaign, is realistic, but it must be paired with a successful defense that avoids operational collapse. Totally agree here. Absent corrective measures, ongoing infantry shortages can lead to such failure. So this is exactly what I was saying yesterday, which is I understand why they're trying to substitute the frontline troops with drones, because they don't have the frontline troops, right? But you still do need the frontline troops to do some of this key defensive work that can only be done by troops. And if you just rely solely on drones, then if you punch through the drone corridor, there's no defense. You just carry on going. And so, there is a real risk involved with that kind of drone substitution, drone corridor approach to defensive warfare, although it is very effective when it works. Okay. The other challenge for the Ukraine, one of the many challenges for the Ukrainians, are the guided glide bombs used by the Russians. They are not only used pervasively right across the front line to a phenomenal number, but they are also insanely destructive. This I show you a lot of Ukrainian successful guided glide bomb strikes. Just look at the sheer explosive force of these Fab 500 bombs, and remember, that if this is correct, these are Fab 500s. You can get Fab 3000s as well. So this is a high-rise building in Konstantinivka getting absolutely destroyed by 3 bombs hitting it. You see the bombs almost come down vertically in a second. There you go. Actually, they're not that first one isn't. It seems vertical because actually I think it's coming from behind the drone. I'm guessing this is probably a Russian drone. FPV drone doing its thing, and from behind it are these guided glide bombs that are coming down. But because the first one comes down from behind it, it looks like it's coming down vertically, and then you get the trajectory of the others that's much more diagonal. That first one, massive explosion. Second one to the right, and then a bit of a delay, and then the third one hits, and you're just thinking, wow, I wonder what that building looks like now. That's a residential building. Konstantinivka is getting absolutely shellacked. Wow. And that's what the Ukrainians are up against day in, day out, sometimes 270 of those hitting the front line. That's why I say, there are so many things that I say are the number one priorities for the Ukrainians. One is just scaling up of distance munitions, just massively. Two is recruitment, boots on the ground. Three is, and in no particular order, but three is sorting out the guided glide bombs. Not only scaling up their own production of guided glide bombs and getting their own air force, having another 70 planes or 100 planes in the air, thank you very much, but actually doing something about the Russian guided glide bombs, somehow shooting down those planes or destroying the planes while they're at a base. So that this then goes back to number one, distance munitions, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones, and you need to be hitting Russian air bases every single night, because those bombs can't be dropped every day to that level ad infinitum. It is unsustainable for Ukraine. Just like I say, the drone strikes are unsustainable. So are the guided glide bombs. Now, Atesh agents are destroying the occupiers' railway infrastructure between Crimea and Kherson. Agents successfully sabotage the railway lines between Simferopol, striking a key logistical artery for Russian occupation forces in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. This is all good news. Although I don't know whether any of these video snippets and claims have already been reported by myself over the last few days. There seems to be a real purple patch at the moment for Atesh claims. But anyway, lots of these small partisan activities, good for the Ukrainians, of course. Now we're on to the distance strikes, and we have 74 missiles and drones sent into Ukraine. So again, lower than it has been, although yesterday was even lower than this one last night. 52 of the 72 were shot down. No missiles by the looks of it, although we're unsure. There's kind of question mark at the missiles, but I assume neither are. Well, actually, no, that's not true. So this is interesting. So 74 missiles and drones got through, and the claim is that 2 Kinzhal missiles were sent and they're not recorded. Some put that as a question mark, because actually last night Tim White was reporting, I think, that one of the Kinzhals was definitely shot down, and it looked like the other one might be heading in the same direction as being where the other one was shot down. So not sure about the Kinzhals. 5 S-300, S-400 surface-to-air missile systems. I imagine they weren't shot down. They're quite difficult because they're usually used just over the border, and it's very difficult to shoot them down because you don't have enough time. They're striking very close to the Russian border. So anyway, all of that in 9 locations, but it looks like you've got, 67 drones were launched, 52, so that's 15 drones out of 67, so that's probably somewhere between 70 and 80% interception rate, which is not super great, but luckily fewer were sent, so 15 is a much better number than we have seen getting through. This is the process of shooting down a Shahed by helicopter, and this is what it looks like from the ground. So helicopter flying around, doing its business, and then, actually before that, so we missed it at the beginning. There's a nice big, there you go, nice big explosion, but it gives you a sense of how considerable those warheads are, I think, compared to what they were at the beginning of the war. They're now 90 kilograms. At the beginning of the war, they were 40 kilograms, something like that. So they've really, the Shahed drones have really come on leaps and bounds from when they kind of first received them from Iran. Ukraine is facing widespread power cuts after generating capacity was reduced to 0 by Russian attacks, reported the Guardian newspaper yesterday. Power to be cut for as much as 16 hours a day across most of Ukraine while repairs are carried out. This is such a challenge. Yeah, power will be cut for between 8 and 16 hours across most regions of Ukraine on Sunday. State transmission system operator Ukrainigo has said after Russian attacks targeting energy infrastructure reduced the country's generating capacity to, quote, zero. I have said, and I've said it already in this video, that these Shahed drone attacks and missile attacks are unsustainable for Ukraine. They cannot sustain this continued bombardment. There has to be something that's done about it, which is why you saw the drone ammunition depot getting hit the other day. Stuff like that has to happen night in, night out. It is so difficult for Ukraine to be able to build up their military resources if their military industrial complex gets hit every night, or if their energy infrastructure gets hit, so they don't have the power to make the equipment. Some of these metalworking facilities that are building up these, whether they be Bogdana self-propelled guns or the new Novator infantry mobility vehicle, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle, whatever it is, that's going to require a lot of power to make. And if you're having such widespread power cuts, it affects the commerce, the industry, affects the psyche of the civilians right across Ukraine. Such a challenge for them. Tim White says, typical Russia, even trying to destroy an environmentally green power plant in Ukraine. I can reveal that this is the Koryukiv plant in Sumy region that was hit. The Clear Energy biogas thermal power station was struck by 3 drones. It had been called a benchmark for the industry. I think it opened relatively recently. It was at 2016 or something, and is a state-of-the-art plant. And that was hit by the Russians, and I presume has stopped working. War Translator says Russian drones destroyed a Clear Energy biomass power plant overnight. Co-founder Andriy Kirilenko said 3 drones hit the facility built in 2016 as Ukraine's first large biomass plant. And yeah, what else? Right, so that's I don't know. So that was actually yesterday, the biomass power plant being hit, probably from the night before. But I don't actually know of any hits in Ukraine from last night's missile and drone attack. It's not to say there weren't significant hits. In fact, it probably indicates that there were significant hits if you're not hearing about them at all. We're going to go on to what Ukraine was able to achieve. And one of the main things was Tuapse. So Tuapse, the port on the eastern Black Sea coastline of Russia, there has been, so for the last hour, said Tim White last night, Russian monitors have been warning of the danger posed by Ukraine's marine drones. So the unmanned sea vehicles or unmanned surface vehicles in Tuapse. There has been an explosion seen here. Exxon Nova reckons it's near Pier 167, but whether it's the drone or a target which has been hit, it's not yet clear. And there's that explosion was seen from a number of different points of view. At night, naval drones attacked the port of Tuapse in Russia's Krasnodar region. Possible hit on a military ship was also reported, but we don't know yet. And this is the moment of the strike in the port. Bit of a flash in the background. You'll see in a second. There you go. So it's quite a large looking explosion there. But then, we see today Tuapse after a night attack. Interesting. I mean, that would denote a bit of nothing. If it hits a large area of concrete that manages to take the impact, and this looks like nothing too important, being corrugated iron being blasted away. But of course, this is coming from Russia. There are claims that a vessel might have been hit. I don't know that anything has come out since then. Kiev denies a Pokrovsk encirclement again, admits logistics are difficult. Ukrainian military denied once again that Russian troops have encircled the embattled city. So it's all sort of fighting over Pokrovsk and then fighting over the narrative over Pokrovsk. Yeah, I don't know that we have anything else. No, from Tuapse, a couple of photos have emerged, says Tim White. Allegedly, to allegedly from Tuapse, the port in Russia's Krasnodar region. We know Sea Babies were active, but this crater is almost certainly from a missile. Did it miss? Was it a combined attack? Still too many questions. So I have to wait to see if there's any information that comes out from Tuapse going forward. Right. Then we heard that a power substation near Jankoy was also targeted in, or supposedly hit in occupied Crimea. The strike adds to the growing wave of attacks targeting Russian military and energy infrastructure on the peninsula. Yes, Crimea is just under so much pressure at the moment. Then there was video evidence, as in CCTV evidence, of a strike in Novokubyshev. I don't know. That sounds more like a hit than air defense. That is an area. Novokubyshev was where I think is a refinery was massively hit recently on multiple occasions. So I wonder if they've gone for the same target again or looking at something else in the region, but we don't have any information yet. Attack on the Vostochnyaya substation in Jankoy. It used to connect power through. Oh, right. So this, if this is the same substation, if that power substation in Jankoy was hit last night, then actually it is really significant because it's used to connect power through the Melitopol Jankoy Simferopol line. In other words, it connects Zaporizhzhia and Kherson area down through Jankoy to the whole of Crimea. I don't know in which direction that goes, but it's going to be pretty significant that has been hit. I would have thought if it has. And then there was an attack on a village of Lihovska in Rostov region near the railway station last night as well, but don't know anything either about that in terms of the finer details. So it looks like the Ukrainians were quite active last night. The results of the Ukrainian FP2 drone strikes on the Shahed warhead storage facilities at Donetsk airport show in some basic analysis that one warehouse was completely destroyed and another was damaged. But the resolution of the satellite imagery at the moment is too poor, in my opinion, to garner anything definitive. So that's what's happened in Russia and Ukraine in terms of strikes, but not a lot of information, all things considered. We also hear that 3 drones initially, and actually we now hear it was actually 5 drones, were reportedly spotted flying over a Belgian nuclear power plant. 3 drones were spotted at the Dole nuclear power plant in northern Belgium last night, according to Deutsche Welle, but also near Liège airport, according to Le Figaro. Flights were halted for nearly an hour there. Right. Now we hear Anton Gerashenko reporting or stating from Politico's report that 5 drones were spotted flying over Belgium's Dole nuclear power plant. And Politico headline is Belgium flounders as 5 drones buzz nuclear power plant. UK, France, and Germany send assistance. We're going to come on to that in a second. Energy company Engie told the newspaper that initially 3 drones were detected, but then we saw 5 drones, which were up in the air for about an hour. The company spokesman, Helen Smeets, spokesperson, said the sightings had no impact on the plant operation, and adding that the relevant authorities are, quote, continuing to monitor the situation. Several similar incidents have been reported in Belgium in recent weeks. In particular, drones were spotted over a military base in Marchen-Famenne over the Eisenborn military base, which I think contains nuclear warheads. So it's slightly worrying. Now, I was going to report this in a geopolitical video. We heard news yesterday after British Chief of Defence Staff Richard Knighton told the BBC that they had sent assistance to Belgium over Belgium's struggling with these drone incursions. The UK is following France and Germany in providing staff and equipment to help Belgium. So I wasn't aware that France and Germany had as well. So that's good news. All the major European nations, size-wise and military-wise, come to help Belgium there. I think it shows, well, not all of them. You've got Italy, obviously, as well. But it goes to show that that there really are genuine threats to European security from these drones. That when you have those three nations getting together to help Belgium out, something is going on. And if this is Russia, well, just more evidence, should we need any, that we really are at war with Russia. Russia's at war with us. Russian activist held in Poland admits that he worked as an FSB agent, court papers say. And this is an article in the Guardian about yet another Russian member of the diaspora community who is doing nefarious work for the FSB. Igor Rogov, who left Russia in 2021, is due to go on trial, accused of informing on other Russian opposition activities. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for the Kremlin, says Moscow wants the war in Ukraine to end, quote, as soon as possible, but only once Russia's original objectives are achieved. He claims Russia prefers a political diplomatic solution and remains open to that path. The pathological lie, as no report says. Russia admitting that they haven't conceded anything and they still want to achieve their maximalist gains there. Just absolutely staggering. Now, the Russian newspapers, according to Steve Rosenberg today, saying a number of things, such as, quote, budget revenues are still falling, trade with China is declining, and petrol supply problems in the regions. Plus an interesting editorial, he says, quote, in a situation where almost everything is prohibited, a little something at least should be permitted. It's difficult for the Russians at the moment, isn't it? Economically speaking. Now, following her visit to Ukraine, superstar Angelina Jolie posted about it on Instagram, and it is pretty good, actually. So I'm really happy that there are still big name Hollywood superstars and stars in general going to Ukraine and really highlighting the plight of Ukrainians and the need for many of these communities and whatnot. I think this is really good news. So that's good. In fact, if we go through what she wrote on Instagram, this is Angelina Jolie. I visited Mykolaiv and Kherson in Ukraine this week to meet families living in the front line. The threat of drones was a constant heavy presence. You hear a low hum in the sky. It's become known locally as a human safari, with drones used to track, hunt, and terrorize people constantly. There was a moment when we had to pause and wait while a drone flew overhead. I was in protective gear, and for me, it was just a couple of days. The families here live with this every single day. They've moved their schools, clinics, and daycare to reinforced basements, determined that life will go on. It was hard but inspiring to witness. Many people spoke to me about the psychological burden of living under continual threat and the deeper fear of being forgotten by the world. That's the key, isn't it? Being forgotten by the world. And that's why she's there doing what she's doing. It is difficult to understand how, in a world with such strong capacity for diplomacy, civilians in Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza, Yemen, the DRC, and so many other places suffer daily, as if there's nothing that those in power can do to end those conflicts and to protect all civilians equally. What gives me hope is the incredible courage and skill of local organizations and volunteers and those who support them. And then she lists a whole bunch of Ukrainians there. If they can find the strength, governments ought to be able to do the same. If they can find the strength, governments should be able to do the same. Absolutely well said, Angelina Jolie there. Now, good news here. Let's end on a positive. Ukrainian dancers Vladislav and Veronica won the final of Holland's Got Talent. Their dance was a story about love, freedom, and faith. One of the judges said, it's not just a dance, it's a feeling of freedom. Due to copyright reasons, I had to turn that off. And I'm sure you can go and watch the whole performance online somewhere. But that's really good news that they, again, it's kind of similar to the Angelina Jolie thing. It's about public recognition of what's going on in Ukraine, the plight of Ukrainians, and just keeping things in the public consciousness. And even stuff like this, Ukrainians successfully doing stuff, abroad, is really important. Now, I'm going to end this video with something a bit left field. Many of you know I have progressive multiple sclerosis. Weirdly, some might see it. I got stem cell therapy for my condition in Russia in 2019, and have subsequently spent like 5 years slagging Russia off, or whatnot. But anyway, I had stem cell therapy over there, and somebody reached out to me who follows my stuff and says, "Look, I've got MS as well." And hello, Kelly, by the way. Um, can you write a book on MS and your challenges and whatnot? I simply don't have time at the moment. I'm struggling to edit a book that I wrote some time ago that really I should have done by now. But anyway, I have mapped out my experiences, my journey with HSCT, with stem cell therapy, with another YouTube channel called JP's Life with Multiple Sclerosis. So if any of you out there do have MS and are interested in a treatment pathway of stem cell therapy, you can see me, after chemotherapy with no hair, and you can see me detail all of what I did. I haven't really done any videos on there, and a blog that goes alongside it. I've done no blog since 2021 on that. But for those of you who are interested and know someone or have MS themselves, you can go and check out uh, my experience there. So anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon.